Hi, I'm John Smith. Welcome back to Kingdom Real for another episode you're going to enjoy.
Okay, so the last time we were talking about your time at the ranch.
Yes.
And I was just wondering, is that the only time that you ever went there?
No, we actually, I went twice and your mom went 3 times. And all of those times were needed. The first time I would describe it as life-saving.
Okay.
The way I would put it is, if it wasn't for our time with Dr. John Walker out at the ranch, there's absolutely no way I'd be in ministry anymore. I'm not 100% convinced that our marriage would have survived, and there's a real strong possibility I wouldn't be around anymore. So I am forever grateful. And after experiencing that, I devoted the rest of my life to serving other pastors and families that would go through similar things that I did. And the way I describe it and the way your mom describes it is our only negative statement about Blessing Ranch. We have one. And that is at the end of the week, you have to go home.
I understand.
We would have loved to stay for another year or two, and
Sure.
you just kind of, but we had to go back to the same place where all this happened.
Tell me what that was like.
It was hard.
Tell me the time frame again of when all this happened, when you went to the ranch.
So the event happened on a Monday night, May 10th, 1999. And we went to the ranch, I believe it was August.
Okay.
And then start of September, I was back at church and doing everything I would do as the pastor. And it was, the hardest thing was I had a block of time that I was away. And during that time, one of my staff members violated some things that I put in place. And I knew I needed to deal with it. And one of my trusted pastor friends that we met all the time kept saying, don't do it, don't do it. You're going to get crucified again. And you were crucified by Christians once, you're going to get crucified again. Don't do it, don't deal with it. And I'm going, I have to. It's a matter of integrity. And so I did. And that led to another disruptive blow up in the church where that person chose to leave in about the most calculated, destructive way possible. And now I had another whole group of people angry at me again. And, in church, walking through the fellowship hall, doing things like that, people passing notes, saying things. It was a scary place just to walk through because you never knew who was going to say what. And your mother never worshiped sitting in the sanctuary until the Sunday I left 3 years later. She was in charge of the nursery. She was in charge of the video production. And so she'd be in nursery one service, running the video on the other, and walk in between. And so she was in church longer than most people, but it was too unsafe for her to sit in a pew because she didn't know if the people next to her, behind her, in front of her, what they were saying, what they were thinking, what they were doing based on what we went through. So that was really hard for her going through all that. So, yeah, and so then that's the point where the depression kicked in. And the joy had been sucked out for about a year. And we met with another pastor and spouse, close friends of ours, and we knew they needed to go to Blessing Ranch. And we tried everything under the sun to convince him to go. And he was dodging and deflecting, and she would have gone in a heartbeat. And this may surprise you, but these words came out of your mother's mouth. I'm very concerned about you, to the other pastor's wife. I don't think you're going to make it. You need to go to Blessing Ranch. I know you won't go on your own, so I'm going with you.
Awesome.
I'm going like, yeah, that's really good stuff. That was amazing. So the two of them went out there, and once again, God worked it out. They were the only 2 people on the ranch.
Amazing.
And so he could work with the other pastor's wife half the time and with Mommy the other half. And it was really helpful for her because I think she was even more deeply wounded than I was. And just to have that time, and then in the evenings, the two of them would watch movies together and just have fun. But during the day, it was counseling, and it was really, really good. So when she got back, I bet she wasn't home a week. And she says, I think you need to go again.
Awesome.
And I said, oh, I'd love to. I have some things I would just love to talk over with John, but I'm not sure if I have a whole week's worth. And she says, what do you think he'd say to that? I says, oh, yeah, okay. So we called up, and amazing, he had another cancellation, and we were able to go just a couple weeks later. We went back out again, so it's my second time, her third time, and again, we're the only ones there. So we get the whole week just with the counselor and us, and this time, it was hope generating. In fact, on one of the afternoons, I was out hiking, and I got carried away, and I was crawled out on this. It had a plateau there, and I crawled out on this edge of it as far as I dared to, and then I just walked across the whole thing, and I blew off my afternoon session, which I never do that, which he thought was a really healthy sign.
Yeah.
And when I came back, and we processed through that, I said, what I discovered up on that mountain, if I keep doing ministry the way I am, I'm going to die. I can't keep going this way. I have to change significantly. And what wasn't clear was, do I go to another church, or do I try to do ministry differently in the same place where I've been all those years? And I made a promise to God when we first went there. He made it so very, very clear that's where he wanted. I said, I'll never leave until you tell me to. And boy, when all this happened, I wanted to leave in the worst way. I didn't want to stay. I wanted to leave, but God hadn't released me. And over this time, he proved how smart he is. Because if he had released me, see, I was fortunate. A lot of pastors who go through what I did don't have the option of staying.
Right.
They're forced out, they're gone. And in my case, the board was united. They wanted me to stay, so I could. But none of them would have faulted me if I had left.
Absolutely.
But here's what I learned. If I had left any point prior to when I did, I would have been a wounded pastor who is unintentionally unaware wounding other people in the next church. I would have been a hurt pastor, unintentionally hurting other people in the church. That's kind of how it works. And God knew that. And I know for myself, I didn't think about this before, but the reason why the hurt went so deep, if it had happened from people in the community, it wouldn't hurt as bad. But it happened from my friends, and they were Christians, and I felt like I was crucified. And in fact, I found a book, or somebody gave me, I can't remember, but the name of the book is Crucified by Christians. And the subtitle is Healing for Those Who Have Been. And I remember reading that book fairly early in this whole process, and oh my goodness, this book, I've since referred it to a few other people, and I had somebody on my staff pass around some other ones like, oh man, don't do that, because there's only one of two responses. Either you go, that's one of the most powerful things I've ever read, or you hate it. Because it will challenge to the very foundation your belief in the sovereignty of God.
Absolutely. Well, I would imagine the whole process of this did.
It did. And I won't give away the thrust of that book, because unless you want me to.
We'll save that for another
We'll save that one. Okay. So here was my toughest assignment to get well. It was impressed upon me partially through the book and partially through just talking to God and hearing what he wanted me to do. And he said, you need to completely forgive every single one of the people who said those things to you and about you.
I can't even imagine where you start with that.
Well, I really didn't know either. Other than the fact, like, well, there is no way I'm going to be able to do this on my own. And so I went to God and says, well, if that's what you're asking me to do, then you better show me how. And I need you to help me with this. I can't do this on my own. It's just too deep, too hard, too many people, too many things. And so I made it a practice to pray several times every day, just asking God to help me forgive people. Asking the Holy Spirit, you need to be the power source on this one. You need to be the inspiration for this because I don't know how to do this. And he gave me because, well, here's the question. How do you know if you really forgave somebody?
Right.
And typically say, okay, God, I forgive them all. Well, okay, that's a good start. We got a lot of work to do after that. And then one by one, so finally I thought, well, how will I know? So this was my little self-test. I had to see one of those people at a distance, other side of the fellowship hall, across the street downtown. And the instant I saw him, I had to immediately have the desire inside to walk right over to them, look them right in the eye, give them a big hug, and genuinely wish their best interest. I figure, man, if I get to that point, I think I've peeled off most of the layers of that onion to get to the core of forgiveness. So that became my journey. For a couple people, it happened pretty quick. For a bunch of people, it took anywhere from 6 months, 9 months to a year. And for a couple people, it took a good 2 years to finally get to that point. But here's the discovery. When you completely, fully forgive the people that wounded you, like Jesus did on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. When you get to that point, you've been down this long pathway, and your breakthrough is into freedom, like you've never experienced it before. And that's what I experienced. God set me free. In fact, the scene from the end of the Shawshank Redemption is a pretty good one. Well, the guy crawls through the tunnel with all this stuff, and he's out there and just raises his arms up in the rain. That was like, okay, that's freedom. And that's what God gave me through that process. So it was hard, it was difficult, and only one person of all those people ever said they were sorry.
One?
One.
Wow.
So what I learned is, do not hinge your forgiveness on somebody else's response.
Absolutely.
Because the only person that unforgiveness hurts is the person holding it. Mm-hmm. So I would either self-destruct, stay depressed, or forgive and then experience freedom. And it was and continues to be amazing.
So I'm going to touch back a little bit on how you were raised.
Yeah.
And then what you went through.
Mm-hmm.
Because how you were raised was a little bit more, I would say, kind of sweep it under the rug,
Sure.
ignore it, you
Yep,
know.
no big thing.
Oh, la, 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 it's not bugging me. So had you taken that route and just kind of numbed yourself
Yeah.
to it,
Mm-hmm.
do you think you would have experienced the same kind of freedom than what you went through to get through the process of forgiveness?
No, I would have been enslaved to my unforgiveness for the rest of my life.
And that just would just eat your insides.
It
And,
would.
you know, I think a lot of people don't realize that,
Yeah.
like what you just said
Sure.
about forgiveness.
Yes. And when you're coaching people, you can't really coach them into and through something you haven't experienced nearly as well. I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to experience everything that people go through to do it, but it's pretty hard to coach somebody down the path of forgiveness of something really significant if you haven't already done it in your own life.
I agree.
And so as I look back at all the things that I went through, especially the tough things, those are the experiences that God has completely redeemed, completely restored, and uses for his kingdom purpose in the lives of other people, so that I can connect with them on a deep heart level that I never would have if I hadn't been through it. I practically never refer to the good things and all the great things that happen. Yeah, they're wonderful, they're great, I'm thankful for them, but where I learned the most was through the hard things, the difficult things, the painful things. And when other people are going through that, you can walk alongside them with empathy, with compassion, with understanding, with love, with kindness, with gentleness, with patience. And because you've been through it, and the only way I made it through it was somebody who was willing to listen to me. Mm-hmm. That's why listening became such a valuable part of who I am in my life to others.
Well, I know on a personal note for me, I learned how to forgive everything that happened in New York through watching you and through watching Mom, and kind of how you guys handled that and that whole process. Because, I mean, I was watching from afar, and I've already mentioned how angry I was at the time, you know, but it really truly taught me what forgiveness looks like and how to truly do that.
Yeah.
And of course, we all still struggle with it, you know.
Sure, it's not easy.
But
And it's not quick.
But to me, watching you guys go through that it was one of the most devastating things, you know, and it blows my mind that you were able to completely full circle, you know, come all the way back around. Yep. And I truly feel like it kind of restored my faith, and it restored, you know,
Praise
a
the
whole
Lord.
bunch of things.
Yep.
And I was willing to go back into a church setting after watching all of that, you know, so I appreciate, and like I said, on a personal note, just thank you for that example.
Can I tell you one more thing about your mom?
Please.
When God called me to leave, and we can talk about this more, but there's a part of it that fits here.
Yeah.
So it actually happened on January 6, 2002. Early in the morning, and then during worship, and then right after church, we quick ran home, got changed. Andrew was in this travel basketball thing, traveled into Nassau County, and we're standing on the sidelines, and we got about 10 minutes while he's warming up out of the court. And without all the details, what'd you get out of the message this morning? I asked her first, so she told me, and then, what'd you get out? I says, well, God told me I'm supposed to leave New Life and go to a new thing he's going to show us. And her response was, I knew it! I almost go back to the table. She says, I knew it! I knew you were going to get that out of it. I'm going, oh, but I don't want to leave.
She said that.
She said that. And then the third statement, which followed up after that, which I was really glad to hear, is, but if that's what God told you to do, I'll go with you. Now, put that in context. From the evening of May 10th, 1999, she is so deeply wounded. She says, I will never trust another person as long as I live. Completely shut down, wouldn't leave the house, wouldn't go to the door, wouldn't answer the phone. Now, almost 3 years pass. 3 trips to Blessing Ranch, processing it on herself, and God tells us to leave finally, and she doesn't want to go. She wanted to stay. To me, that is such a powerful example of God's healing, transforming power in both of us, individually, as a couple, as a family. I just think that's a powerful, powerful story that brings hope to a hopeless situation. And we're not the only people who have gone through tough things. There's so many people in our world today that have gone through such horrendous things, far worse than we did. So my hope and prayer is that by sharing these stories, it gives others hope.
Absolutely.
That God is real, that he loves us, that he's with us in the midst of our darkest, most painful moments, and he's the one who brings the healing and the restoration and the perspective and the ability to forgive and the freedom that we all crave for, long for, and need with a healed, transformed heart. And in my experience, my emotional, spiritual wounds take so much longer to heal than a physical wound.
Absolutely.
If you cut your hand, break your arm, break your leg, that can get repaired fairly quick. When it's that kind of emotional wounding for any number of different ways, it's a much more difficult journey that typically people have much less patience for. You're still dealing with that? Why don't you get over it?
Doesn't
No,
heal
it's
that
a process.
quick.
It doesn't heal
Right.
that quick. This is not just a broken arm. This is a wounded heart.
Absolutely.
And that takes time.
And I feel like people can't see it.
Well, exactly.
Just like when
If your
you
arm's
have,
in a sling, compassion flows
Absolutely.
out. If you're depressed, people look like, well, what's wrong with you? Come on,
Right.
get it together. Pull out of it.
Yeah, suck it up. You got this.
Yeah. Doesn't work that way.
Absolutely. So you had touched on earlier, and I just want to come back to how do you find the people that you work with through Pastor Care? How do you find the pastors and the ministry leaders?
On the people that I'm serving, or people that are
Right
part
now.
of the it happens in a variety of ways. I'm always listening and watching. So if I hear something when I'm meeting with a pastor, or I go worship there, something like that, I'm always listening to how healthy they are and what's happening. So a lot of times I'll just take them to lunch or breakfast afterwards and just be a safe place. I will pay attention and have others helping me on that. If they get word that so-and-so just got let go from the church, so-and-so just got fired or whatever, I will usually reach out and offer my services. Sometimes they accept it, sometimes they don't. I don't know that anybody's ever been offended by me calling them and offering my services.
Sure.
Sometimes they, well, no, I have other people, okay, that's great. I don't need to, just didn't want you to be alone on this. Some people just really are amazed by that. Mm-hmm. I have, and then all the pastors, the hundreds of pastors that I've worked with over the years, they let me know when they know somebody who needs it.
Oh,
they
awesome.
experienced help, so, well, he helped me.
Sure.
And so several of the people I'm working with right now, that's how I found them. Mm-hmm. Other people that I've helped, they tell them. I have some denominational leaders that are aware of what I do and believe in what I do, so they'll ask me to work with some of their pastors. Not recently, but several times I got calls from Focus on the Family.
Okay.
And they would refer pastors to me where they had been on the phone a few times and we needed to go further. So a multitude of ways like that.
So I just want to circle back kind of to the burnout now that we've kind of heard, the whole story.
Yep.
What are some signs? What does burnout look like? Maybe what it looked like in your life, what you know
Sure.
of what it looks like in others.
Yeah, it can vary person to person, but burnout, as I experienced it, and when I was in seminary, they first started talking about burnout.
Okay.
And I remember thinking, well, it didn't sound real to me. And I remember actually, I don't know if I ever said it out loud, but I know in my heart I'm going, well, I'd rather burn out than rust out. In my mind, I'm not going to be a lazy pastor. I'm going to be doing, obviously it wasn't. And I thought burnout was kind of a joke. I didn't know it was real until I experienced it. And depression can be part of it. Just an overwhelming sense that you're inadequate in every way, that you don't have what it takes, you don't measure up. I'm not as gifted a preacher as that person. I don't have the administrative talents of that person. I don't have the leadership skills of that person. I'm just average Joe, average John, whatever. And so it's really easy to get into the comparison game, which is deadly.
Oh yeah.
And both self-comparison to others and then other people's comments like, oh, so-and-so on the TV sure was good this morning. Hope you got something for us. It's like, oh, great. Now I get to measure
Right.
up with that. Those things would happen. For some, it's hard to get out of bed in the morning and do things. I never really experienced that side of it. But as I'd mentioned before, the joy getting sucked out of your life. The things that you used to love about ministry all of a sudden just weigh you down. And I remember probably one point that's clear in my mind that I was struggling with that was, oh man, how do I get into all that? But the thing that's popping into my head now is after 9/11, I was actually on a long overdue sabbatical, came back a little early, and had 3 sets of meetings with different leadership groups in the church. I had a meeting with the staff, a meeting with all the elders and deacons, and then ministry leaders. I had these 3 meetings, and in all 3 meetings, I said, well, we've been through a lot. Thank you for all your service and so on and so forth. Talk to me about what your experience was. And in all 3 meetings, there were, to my shock and surprise, there were several people that were really angry with me because on the Sunday after 9/11, I didn't do what they expected from their senior pastor.
Which was what?
I was scheduled to be someplace else, but I came and I called into the church office. I called my associate pastors who I'd put in charge. Want me to come into the office? No, we got it covered. Want me to be there for the service on Sunday? No, we got it covered. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, with Mommy being in charge of the video team, we gave the video crew the day off. And so I says, you do the directing, I'll be on a camera. And I think Matt was on the other camera. And we'll just film it. So we got there early. And I was just hugging, crying with people until the service. And then we filmed it, went back down nonstop with people till we filmed the second service, then nonstop people afterwards. So I was there for, 5 or 6 hours. And but what I found out was, in many people, was because I didn't come into the sanctuary and because I didn't go up on the pulpit and just be there for a minute or two and say, we're going to be okay, everybody's fine, that type of thing, that's what they needed. That was what they called leadership of their senior pastor. And they're not totally wrong, but I was trying to honor the other folks and also to do what I do best, to be there to comfort and encourage other people. I actually had no desire to preach that Sunday.
I'm sure.
If I had to, I would have. But my associate could hardly wait. He was so excited to be able to preach that Sunday. And one of my 2 friends who, spoke in a lot of different churches, it was a horrible Sunday for him because he had no place to go preach. So I began learning quite a bit about myself in that process, where I was at. And then in each of those 3 meetings, I learned a few people at each one were mad at me, which surprised me. And then they had a whole list of stuff that wasn't going well at the church. And as I listened to that, for the first time in all those years, it just was really hard to hear. In the past, anytime I'd hear stuff like that, well, hey, we could do this, we could do that. I always had ideas. I was full of energy. Oh, let's try this. And that time I was like, no, I can't do this. And I began to think, they need a new leader. They need somebody who doesn't have all the baggage that I do. I just felt inadequate and too tired and drained to do it. When the complaints and the problems about this and that and the other thing, I was like, okay, I've heard that before. I don't know what to do. And it was so strange for me. I'd never had that before. I was just like, oh man, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And then I started thinking like, I think it's time for somebody else. They need another leader. I can't do this. And preaching became harder and harder, and leading became harder and harder, and creative ideas weren't coming like they were. In hindsight, looking back at that, those are all key indicators of burnout. Mm-hmm. And it was more real than I anticipated it could be. And I remember actually because of my earlier journey and reading books on it. And in that second week at Blessing Ranch for me, we dealt with a lot of the issues of depression and burnout and what was going on more than the first time. So now I'm coming, and he was teaching me, you know, some things like, well, when you feel it coming, when you see, these are some strategies, some tools you can use. And I was using best I could, but it really wasn't working too well at that point, because it just kind of came back with a vengeance. And once again, it was like, I got blindsided by it. I did not, going into any of those meetings, I just did not expect that to happen. And I was like, wow, okay. But God still hadn't released me. I'm going, come on. And then a couple months later, he did. But I had to complete all the forgiveness first. I had to experience again, I think, the depression. Mm-hmm. And so that at the point of release, that was good. And we could talk about this on another time, but there was a key thing that happened during my depression. I read another book for the second or third time, and for the first time. And that prepared me that when he called me to leave, I could make it all official on the same day. And if I hadn't read that book, the whole book in 2 or 3 days, I wouldn't have had the courage or understand the need for doing that. And my fear was, if I didn't make it official on a one day, I might talk myself out of it later.
Sure.
And I'm so glad I didn't. It was absolutely the right decision. And at that point, God clearly, through Scripture, through prayer, and through the message that somebody else was giving that day, now's the time. Because at that point, I was, other than the depression, I was healthy again, the church was healthy again, and now it was time to release. And that's where that last piece of freedom came. And it was after that release, I watched the second half of Shawshank Redemption for the first time. And when I saw it, I go, that's me. That's how I feel. And I was like, oh, like the weight of the whole world had finally been removed from my shoulders. I was like, oh, thank you, Lord. I can finally leave and go home. And that was precious. I'll never, ever forget that.
Amen. Well, thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Incredible.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
My pleasure. So, thank you for being part of Kingdom Real. We value you. Hopefully this is a good experience for you. I'm John Smith saying so long until next time.